Throughout this process, then we proactively work with the lender and all involved parties to make sure that their questions are answered and the funds are released on a timely basis. And really what this does is by leveraging this process to Baker Tilly, it can really free up the owner to focus their time on other project management tasks. And it also offers assurance that the draws are being processed efficiently and the project costs are being accurately tracked.
Welcome to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast where you can find all the buzz around multifamily housing. I'm Don Bernards, the partner in charge of Baker Tilly's multifamily housing practice.
And I'm Garrett Gibson, a partner at Baker Tilly, also specializing in consulting on multifamily housing transactions across the country.
Each week, we'll bring you a guest or a topic in the multifamily housing industry that will help you win now and anticipate tomorrow. Let's get started. Our guest today in the Buzz House is Bob Zelmer, a colleague of ours at Baker Tilly, who is a senior manager on the construction risk management team. We're going to have a discussion with Bob today about a couple areas of his work, including construction draw work as well as construction audits. Before jumping into our discussion with Bob, we have a couple of items of industry news as we roll out of the holiday season. To start off with, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA, recently published a final rule establishing updated affordable housing goals for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the enterprises. The rule for multifamily requires Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to support the development of at least 415,000 rental homes annually that are affordable to renters with incomes at or below 80% of the area median income, and this is an increase from 2021. There's a sub-goal for units affordable to very low-income renters, those earning 50% of the AMI or below, also increased from 60,000 units to 88,000 units. So some big increases for the enterprises on their production requirements for this coming year. One other quick tidbit, there's legislation in the Florida Senate that would create a state historic tax credit equal to 20% of qualified rehab expenditures, similar to the federal rules. There would also be a bonus 10% credit for properties in areas designated as part of the Florida Main Street program. So continuing the trend of states that Garrett and I have talked about regarding adding state LIHTC or additional state historic. With that, we're going to jump into our conversation with Bob, and Garrett will kick things off. Garrett?
All right, thanks, Don, and welcome, Bob. We're obviously very glad to have you join the Buzz House today. But before we get into the discussion, go ahead and start out by letting our listeners know about your role with Baker Tilly.
Will do. Thank you, Don and Garrick. I really appreciate being able to join you here today. So, as you already noted, I'm a senior manager on our construction risk management team, and my primary role is to work with our clients and help them identify and mitigate risk on their construction projects. And we can help with this actually in a number of ways. Our primary role is to audit construction projects to verify the contractor's compliance with the terms of their agreement. We can also assess the project controls environment to identify potential controls gaps and the associated risks with those, followed with recommendations to mitigate those risks. We can also review contract documents and make recommendations on where the owner can strengthen the terms to avoid overspending and create more cost transparency. Along with this, and what we'll talk about a little bit today, is we also can help the owners manage the draw process with their lenders throughout the construction phase of the project to ensure their project costs are both accurately tracked and recorded, and the contractor and other consultants and vendors are paid on a timely basis.
Awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Bob. Why don't we go ahead and sort of jump into our discussion? And we'd like to start out first by discussing some components of your work around the actual construction draw process. Would you be able to give us sort of an overview of your services around this actual process?
Yeah, thank you, Garrick. I'm very happy to walk through this. So we typically get involved just before closing on the construction loan. And what we do is manage the draw process with the construction lenders. And this includes compiling all the relevant schedules and support to cause the lender to release funds for the current period. And we start by doing a detailed review of the loan and dispersing documents along with the project pro forma documents. And from this, we extract the key terms and requirements that are applicable to the draw process. We also connect with the loan servicers up front to walk through their process and identify any additional documentation requirements. Additionally, as such, we can assist with other funding sources as well, such as equity contributions or reimbursement-based or grant-type funding. And what we do here is we verify the qualifying costs are segregated and tracked appropriately in order to trigger the release of these funds. And in a lot of cases, we can also assist in compiling any of the additional required compliance reporting. Throughout this process, then we proactively work with the lender and all involved parties to make sure that their questions are answered and the funds are released on a timely basis. And really what this does is by leveraging this process to Baker Tilly, it can really free up the owner to focus their time on other project management tasks. And it also offers assurance that the draws are being processed efficiently and the project costs are being accurately tracked.
Thanks for that background. Bob, I know we've had a chance to work with you on a number of projects and, various lenders and loan products. And like you said, there's even grants and in other sources. Are you seeing many differences in what is being requested, for this submission or overall process?
Yeah, Don, that's a great question. Really, the underlying documentation requirements don't typically change from lender to lender. They're all going to require some type of draw request and a sources and uses document along with all the supporting cost documentation. But what can change from project to project are the required forms themselves. And now we have our own library of draw documents that have been accepted by quite a few lenders. However, in certain cases, the lender may have their own specific forms they require with each draw submission. And we identified these items during our initial review of the loan documents and discussed them with the lender prior to submitting the first draw in order to ensure that all their requirements will be met. The other thing that can change as well too is the approval process can also vary between lenders and loan products as well. So, for example, most lenders are going to require a fully executed draw package for them to start the review process. However, in the past, I have worked with certain lenders that actually require a draft package first, and then when the review is complete, then they'll actually look for that final executed package to be submitted. As it relates to construction change orders, certain lenders, follow a very rigorous process and require a review from their third-party construction inspector along with all the supporting cost backup before they'll even allow the owner to execute the change order and request reimbursement for it. Whereas others may have a more informal process where they rely on the architect or the owner's representative to ensure that the change order work is both justified and completed as stated. In other areas as well too, use of the project contingency is another item that can change from project to project. In certain cases, the lender will allow the owner to use the contingency as they see fit throughout the project. However, in others, we can see a more stringent procedure whereby the lender reviews each and every use of the project contingency and may go so far as to require that the contingency usage not exceed the overall project completion. So, for example, if your project is 25% complete, they'll require that the contingency usage can't exceed more than 25% of the contingency value at that point in time. Other differences we see are related to the loan products themselves. So, for example, certain funding sources may be reimbursement based, as we've discussed, and they might be related to specific project costs. So this is going to require the owner to certify that they've incurred and paid the cost before the funding can be obtained. And in each of these instances, we identify these requirements up front. We track the costs and we assist with the required reporting where necessary to avoid delays in funding.
Thank you, Bob. That was a lot of good information and some interesting nuances for our listeners to think about. Bob, what are some key things you focus on? Maybe some best practices as you kind of work through this process.
Yeah, sure. That's another great question. Really the key to success on these projects is the upfront planning and communication that happens. As I previously mentioned, we do a very thorough review of the loan documents and project pro forma to to get an understanding of the different funding sources, the allowable uses for those sources, as well as the key requirements to draw on them. So as I mentioned briefly before too, we then go ahead and we actually schedule a kickoff call or multiple calls for that instance that include the lender, the title company if one's being utilized, the contractor, and the owner. And really what we do on this call is we walk through each entity's processes to make sure that we're all on the same page. And this really helps to facilitate a smooth process once the contractor begins submitting payment applications and we begin compiling the draw requests. We then typically pull together a draft draw package and submit that to all the required parties to ensure that it meets their requirements prior to the first draw. Another item that we'll also do as well is we'll pull together a draw submission schedule to help manage the process as well. And this is typically driven by either the contractor's anticipated payment application submission dates, or it could be actually driven by the lender's schedule as well too. So certain lenders have certain dates that they want to see the draw submitted by, and so we'll adapt our schedule to that. But really, this helps those involved understand, when we'll need documents to process the draws. And with this, we also actually layer in the milestones that trigger funding from the reimbursement-based funding sources or the equity installments. That way we can actually begin collecting the required documents for these items well in advance of the milestone to avoid any significant delays.
Thanks, Bob. I really enjoy the fact that you added that aspect of the milestones. That's typically, for me, that's an important item. But on the other hand, so, we talked about best practices, but what are you seeing as the main reason for delays in getting a draw funded?
I mean, really, the main cause of delays is typically due to incomplete documentation. We always try to hold draw submissions until the package is complete, but in certain cases, documents like lien waivers, which, those are going to be a typical lender requirement to fund any draw, they can typically lag behind a little bit. And in these cases, we work with the lender to get the review process started, and then we regularly follow up with the contractor and the other individuals as needed to obtain the missing items and keep the process moving forward. In certain cases, as with equity installments as well too, there may be some requirements for compliance reporting from third parties that can actually delay the installment if they're not completed on a timely basis as well. And so here again, we kind of rely on that initial planning phase, and we aim to get ahead of this, and we actually track the progress against these milestones throughout the project and openly communicate when specific items are going to be needed.
Thanks for that, Bob. And, switching gears now, I know you do a lot of construction cost audits, and there's a big focus on rising construction costs and also people paying a little more attention to it in a wide variety of capacities, especially in the affordable housing industry. So would you be able to give us just an overview on the actual construction cost audits you perform?
Certainly. So these services are really a risk mitigation tool to help our clients identify and mitigate financial risks on their projects. Our objective is to really provide cost transparency and assurance to owners that their contractors were compliant with the terms of their contracts. And we can really get involved at any point in the project, ranging from, before the contracts are executed to coming in at closeout and really anywhere in between. And probably the most important aspect on these cost audits is the initial risk assessment that we perform on these. And so this really includes that review of the contract terms and conditions, as well as, conversations with the project management team to understand their concerns about risks on the project. And we really help the owner identify where they're exposed, either due to, undefined, ambiguous, or disadvantageous terms in the contract or other risks that may have come up throughout the project as well too. And if we're involved early, we can make recommendations to the owner to strengthen their contract terms. And of course, I do want to point out we're not lawyers, therefore we always do recommend that any terms that we recommend be reviewed by their legal counsel as well. But I should also note, if we're involved early in the project, we can also provide analysis to the owner that can actually aid in their contract price negotiations as well. But, as I mentioned, the risk assessment is really the most important part of one of these contract audits. And, From this assessment, we develop an audit program specific to the construction project itself. And this is really the detailed testing that we'll perform throughout the project to verify contract compliance and ensure that these risks are mitigated. And this typically includes, testing the contractor's payment applications and change orders, verifying and verifying allowance and contingency usage where appropriate. And essentially, then what we do is we help verify all costs charged to the owner are both valid and contractually compliant.
Thank you, Bob, for that overview. Bob, in doing your work in this area, what are some of the common areas you find errors kind of in your analysis or testing?
Sure. I think it's first important to point out, what we typically find are items related to, either oversights or misinterpretations of the contract terms. They're usually not of a malicious or fraudulent nature. And we also take a very open and transparent approach with the owner and contractor in addressing any errors to both, confirm the observation along with, the resolution of the item as well. So some recent examples here. We had one recently where, the contractor misinterpreted the terms related to their fee on change orders. And what they were actually doing is they were using what the subcontractors were allowed for their markup instead of using the stipulated rate for the construction manager's markup. So in most cases, your subcontractor is going to be allowed somewhere between a 10 and a 15% markup, whereas the construction manager themselves is somewhere between 3 and 5%, right? So in this case, the result was about a $40,000 overcharge on those change orders. We also look for things like duplicate scope on change orders as well. So these are items that are included in a change order, but were also included in the initial contract price, which includes a duplicate charge, which results in a duplicate charge for that particular item. So we noted this on a project actually recently for one of our draw management clients. They had asked us to kind of take a deeper dive into some of the change orders that were coming in from their contractor, and one of the items that came in was a $25,000 charge for a new sewer line connection. And so we reviewed both the change order documents and the initial scope of the original contract and noted that this work was actually already included in the contract price. So we were then able to recommend that the owner kind of go back and request further detail from their contractor to substantiate, the actual change in price from their original estimate. We also do find a lot of arithmetic errors as well too. So this example is one we actually share quite a bit, and I'll admit it does sound a little bit exaggerated, but it's actually a really good example of an error that can go undetected if no one's looking for it. So on a rather large project, we had a contractor accidentally move the decimal point a couple of places on one of their labor rates, and this actually resulted in a charge of $270,000 an hour for one particular employee. And the aggregate result of that ended up being about a $2 million overcharge on one particular payment application. And it's interesting because it initially went undetected because the owner themselves was actually expecting about a $10 million payment application from their contractor for that particular month, and the actual payout fell within that threshold. So no one really thought to look for this error. So this is one where when we found it, we immediately called up both the contractor and the owner, and this one was quickly corrected.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Bob. Just the various errors, just something so simple as inadvertently slipping a decimal place. So for all our listeners out there, right, there's some very simple, obviously, like you said, not purposeful errors and so forth that just happen, right? So it's good to have kind of your eyes on it. But just actually one final question. That was obviously a very large contract you just talked about. What is a good candidate to receive a construction audit? Is it the size of the project, or what kind of do you look at and say, hey, yeah, this might make sense?
Sure. And actually, I think I would point out that most projects are a good candidate. Two of the examples that I just noted previously were on projects that were both less than $10 million. And I mean, our current list of projects, for example, range from renovations of just a few million dollars to multi-billion, and that's billion with a B, dollar mega projects. Our methodology is, it really is scalable, and it can be applied to most projects, whether that's, doing just a limited review to identify any potential red flags, or a full-scale audit of all project costs. And really what these audits, provide to the owner is cost transparency and assurance that their project management team has enforced and their contractor has complied with the terms of their agreement.
Perfect. Bob, thank you very much with that today. I want to thank Bob for joining the Buzz House and his wealth of information. And listeners, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for listening to Buzz House. To receive a notification when new episodes are available, please subscribe to Buzz House, a Baker Tilly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. For additional resources around multifamily housing, check out bakertilly.com. And if you have a suggested topic, please send them to build@bakertilly.com. That's BUILD@bakertilly.com.